The concept of justice, now fully put into the capable and virtuous hands of our beloved governmental institutions, is first and foremost a subjective notion, masquerading as a universal truth. While we would like to believe that the society we exist in and the individuals that compose it agree with us on a definite version of what just means, the current state of our world and the endless ideological oppositions it hosts points to the contrary. It is that societal instability that births vigilantes. Disappointed by the lack of rigidity demonstrated by the superior powers tasked to protect the weak and innocent, some men decide to take matter into their own hands and dispense justice the way they see fit. The execution of these ideas can take the form of anti-mafia raids, delinquent hunting, or corrupt politicians' hangings, with always in mind the thought that physically removing vectors of evil from the world might be the only way to defeat evil itself. They often have to resort to wearing masks and disguises to hide their real identity, in fear that the rightful rulers of morality would try to prevent them from doing the dirty work that is so desperately needed to achieve justice. These camouflages can range from simple face masks to body gear to entire attires, as is the case here with this mix between Guts' berserker armor and an Iron Man suit. This anonymity allows the vigilante to express the full extent of his devotion to the idea of justice he wishes to see triumph, both in terms of words and actions. Besides the freedom of speech a mask offers its wearer, the costume can also contain certain gadgets that can be very useful in handling criminals. If we were to take Batman for example, his bat boomerang, utility belt and multiple vehicles come in handy when it comes to apprehending Gotham's scum. Unlike Bruce Wayne, however, the man we're going to be discussing today doesn't embarrass himself with ropes and other capture devices, since he always kills the criminals he finds on the spot. In opposition to some of the most benevolent vigilantes out there, who just want to set outlaws straight, he shows no quarter for their kind and delivers them swift death with little respect for due process. Not one to turn up his nose at some light-hearted fun, he still takes some time to psychologically torture those he will execute before granting them liberation. He makes a show of his determination and involvement in the vigilante business by putting his own life in the balance, which isn't saying much considering his body armor is fully bulletproof. The act of granting a possible escape route to the target he's decided to kill is a way for him to install a complete fear of justice into their hearts and make them repent from their actions, which can range from murder to a simple car robbery. To him, it doesn't matter. If you break the law, you must die. This is where things start to go south. The issue with vigilante justice is that it puts the powers of both deliberation and decision into the same hands, whose owner is now free to decide what constitutes punishable offenses and what the punishment for them should be. Let's just say that when the sentence is always death for any level of infraction, it doesn't give much wiggle room to the unfortunate lawbreaker. The one weakness of that type of absolutist worldview is that they cannot resist examination, as the thought process that resulted in their genesis isn't based on logic. It is therefore easy to turn that very same extremist mindset onto its wielder, who rarely wants to be on the receiving end of his folly. The issue in this case is that Majin Robocop over here has no issues with this concept of justice coming full circle and biting him in the ass. Actually, he intends on executing himself once he's cleansed the world of evil. This madman's name is Akoya Seishu, the focus of this Muscle Manga episode. He is also the captain of the 44th Riot Squad, and can rock a suit like nobody else from the Kengan verse. He's one of my favorite characters, probably because I find his strength and determination to fulfill his goals endearing. It would have probably been more politically correct to admit that if his life pursuit would have been to become Hokage or capture every Pokemon, but someone's got to take out the trash, and damn it if Akoya doesn't do it with style. Besides the absolute badass catchphrases, he's also got one of the most visually impressive physiques out of the entire Kengan Ashura series. Standing at 191 cm tall or 6 feet 2 and weighing in at 114 kg or around 250 pounds, he has an amount of muscle that many tall men would kill to possess. However, more than just his sheer mass, it's the way it got distributed on his frame that is so impressive. It looks like 40% of his upper body mass concentrated into his forearms, making them appear almost bigger than his legs. They're so huge and wide that he can utilize them as anti-riot shields, which is kind of reminiscent of Frankie from One Piece, if he ever decided to switch sides to join Blackbeard's crew, and become a bloodthirsty cyborg. On top of having the size to match Pole's gear, they also possess the same level of rigidity, which perfectly matches Akoya's steely demeanor. He's a robot inside and out, as we will come to discover in more details later on in this episode. This freakish sturdiness allows him to utilize his wrists to cut up the flesh of opponents seeking to attack him head-on, using his forearms for solid barricades that can suddenly turn into razors. This ability to quickly switch from defense to offense is made possible by his superhuman reaction time, which sits at 75 milliseconds. For comparison, the reaction time of an average adult is around 225 milliseconds, with the fastest individuals getting recorded in the high 100s. For all we know, having a reaction time below 100 milliseconds is not possible. This is explained by the fact that Akoya is actually getting puppeteered throughout his fights by his associate, Shunka. Every movement he makes during combat is actually the result of impulsions transmitted to his inner ear by a mechanical device implanted there for the sole purpose of turning him into a domination machine. Iyama's special talent, an incredibly accurate internal clock, allows her to observe and analyze any type of pattern and decipher them frame by frame. By itself, this would only make her a gifted mathematician, but combine that with Akoya's reflexes and an earpiece and you got yourself the perfect environment to create a killing drone. Of course, all of that would be completely useless if the vessel didn't have an excellent reaction time to start with, and is not to say that Seishu would be slow if he were to be on his own. However, the combination of these two distinct quirks propels him far beyond human limitations. By completely retraining his reflexes and giving up on his own perception, he allows for the action to take the most direct route, which saves a lot of time and reduces the margin of error drastically. This is only made possible because Akoya is willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill his idea of justice, even if it involves literally relearning how to use his senses. However, this arrangement is not without flaws, as we will see later. Akoya's robotic nature also extends to the way he treats his opponents, who he brutalizes without the slightest concern for their bodily integrity and ability to return to a normal life after their fight. This should come off as no surprise, however, considering he routinely executes petty criminals. We could blame this tendency onto his puppet master, who is simply taking the shortest path to victory she knows by targeting open wounds and weak points. The poor souls that end up having the misfortune to face him in the ring end up matched against a merciless fighting automat that will continue to deliver strikes after strikes until they eventually stop moving or give up. But since they haven't committed any crimes that Akoya would know of, they get to walk away with their lives. Or do they? I already expressed the dangers of the moral grey area that vigilante justice exposes those who are sentenced by it. Considering how liberal Akoya is when it comes to delivering the death penalty, it's not hard to imagine that his opponents might actually be in real danger when facing his fists. And since anyone who doesn't align perfectly with what he considers just is an enemy, that makes it so that the entirety of the world's population is effectively a potential future victim of his ideology. The one safeguard that is keeping everyone in the Kengan tournament safe is the total control that Iyama has over Seishu, who has surrendered himself entirely to his machinist and is content with letting his body be a simple tool. However, what happens when the calculations responsible for the puppet's motions fail? You could think that Akoya Seishu, separated from his enhanced reaction time and ability to avoid any blow, would simply fall apart. However, that's not what happens. Pinned down by an opponent that outweighs him by over 60 kilograms, he simply informs his operator that her mistakes will cost the man his life, and proceeds to kick him so hard that he imprints the mark of his foot onto his face. One can't help but think that having his knees give out under him due to his weight meant he got off easy, as the victor made sure to precise that he's lucky to walk away with his life. The analysis could end there, framing his character as being a simple archetype of the ultra-violent vigilante that was popularized in Western media by the Punisher-type hero who seeks to rid society of criminals, no matter the means, methods, or cost. His stoic nature, exaggerated to the point of appearing a little silly at times, and his cheesy one-liners and goofy Power Ranger poses also point to his character being a parody of the Dirty Harry trope. His fighting style, which is mostly defined by his impeccable defensive skills, also align with this portrayal. He is a robot, both in emotions and in combat style, a perfect mechanism, engineered for the sole purpose of slaying, with an unhinged take on justice as carburant and a genius sidekick as pilot. As the crime scene that introduced us to Inspector Akoya still floats in our minds, there remains a vague feeling of unease surrounding his persona, as if the part of the darkness within him that we were now privy of only constituted a small portion of the abyss that resides within his soul. This hint is reinforced by the few snippets of his ideology we were exposed to, which failed to paint him as the usual tortured cape crusader mainstream comics have gotten us used to. The acts of gratuitous violence against his female partner and the apparent sub-dom relationship they entertain also participate in blurring out the shaky picture we managed to make of the guy. It's also a little bit concerning to realize that the one person who's supposed to be keeping his homicidal tendencies in check seems to be entirely under his spell, both mentally and physically. There is something much more vicious at play here, as if the robot known as Akoya Seishu was actually powered by a form of nuclear energy that could go rogue at any moment. His mental pathways, which associate personal victory to the furthering of justice, refuse to accept defeat as a possible option, as he expressed to Iyama before his next fight. Now, what would happen if the communication between those two failed again, and the opponent didn't have to give up the fight due to a TKO? Well, I guess we'll find out. As the face-off commences, the duo unveils their latest weapon, a custom fighting stance made specially to suit Akoya's body shape and combat ability. Just like the high-tech armor he wears when out fighting crimes, this Taiyo Jutsu has only one goal: allowing him to rush and kill sinners as quickly and as effectively as possible, turning his usual defensive style into a form that mainly specializes on offense. The fact that it was directly inspired by the current Fang of Metsudo, who is one of the deadliest fighters in the series, says more than enough about its lethality. Paired with their puppeteering act, this turns the cop into a relentless homing missile, able to see any blow coming and gain on his opponent with every wasted punch or kick. And when you see what Akoya does to those he can put his hands on, you really don't want to let him catch you. In this case, however, the opponent is Imai Cosmo, a genius jujitsu artist who possesses the ability to enter the zone, a specific headspace that slows down time considerably and allows him to put his opponent into holds they have no chance of escaping. Akoya and his partner, who had studied this technique and knew how to counter it, were completely shut down by Cosmo's team, which managed to interrupt the signal that was supposed to protect the vigilante from any deadly grappling move. Despite having the strength to counter an armbar using raw power, the Taiyo Jutsu practitioner is quickly put into a rear neck choke as Cosmo transitions into what should be the finishing move of their fight. It is at this moment that Akoya, who was yet again put into a delicate situation by his partner's failure to follow simple directives, announces that her services are no longer needed. With a completely changed expression on his face, he proceeds to use the powerful muscles of his forearms and hands to dig his fingers into his enemy's arm, penetrating his flesh with each digit. As long as Akoya can get his hands on you, no type of submission move will make him tap. He'll simply grip whatever part he can catch, and squeeze until he reaches the bone. Speaking of bones, trying to create some distance with this wild dog isn't a solution either. Once he's renounced his operator and cut off his strings, there is no coming back. The state he's in compels him to seek and savage his opponent, using whatever means necessary to do so. This includes going in for a double leg takedown and sinking his teeth into the opponent's thigh, in such a faithful cannibalistic fashion that Jack Hanma himself would have nothing but praise for his performance. Doesn't this remind you of the scene where he bites back his bicep off? At least he had the decency to make it quick, unlike Akoya, who seems to be taking his sweet time munching on some quad muscles. Completely possessed by his conviction, he has become what he seeks to combat, a murderous psychopath with a taste for blood. In Nietzsche's words, beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. This is the reason why his partner was so panicked when her pardon predictions failed. Not that she feared the punishment, but rather that she was terrified of the monster her mistake would unleash onto the world. To fight absolute evil, you end up having to resort to absolute means. Akoya, who started working as a vigilante for the right reasons, eventually had to transform himself into a werewolf of sort. One who would be able to awaken all the rage and violence of the world to put an end to evil. As a result, this fanaticism entirely consumed him, making it so that he would not only have to take his own life eventually, but that this very pursuit of justice would become tainted by his inability to distinguish between good and evil, leading him down a path of carnage.
Men get arrested. Dogs get put down.
This is exactly what happens during his fight against Cosmo, who, as far as he knows, has committed no other crime than refusing to lose to him. The poor grappler, who is utterly traumatized by having parts of his body consumed live by another human, is in no shape to continue. And yet, Akoya is still fully dedicated to not only continue the confrontation, but also to kill him at the end, fully convinced that he is acting in favor of justice and the common good. He had fought as a puppet for the first half of the tournament, partly to produce better results thanks to increased reaction time. But it was mainly an effort on his operator's part to make sure that the demon inside him would never awaken, for the reasons that follow. After having immobilized his opponent, he sticks his thumb in between his ribs and starts playing with his intercostal muscles. This is one of the areas of the body with the biggest concentration of nerve endings, which makes it extremely sensitive to pain. Once he locates one, he wraps his finger around it and pulls, resulting in indescribable agony. Making sure to shove his meaty forearm into Cosmo's mouth to prevent him from giving up, and regularly slapping him to keep the boy awake, Akoya is dedicated to locating and snapping the nerves of each of his 24 ribs as a way to make him atone for his perceived sins. As someone who sprained his intercostal once and still reels from the pain it caused, this cannot help but make me nauseous. Having gone way past what would constitute a reasonable punishment, even for a convicted criminal, Akoya elects to take this torture session to his feet, all the while making sure to continuously choke Cosmo out and nurture him with tender words of death threats and promises of endless pain. Akoya Seishu is one of the most evil examples of what a man who was gifted with immense physical strength and abilities can do once his soul becomes entirely consumed by madness. In a sense, his demonic appetence for physical abuse is what allowed Cosmo to walk out of this fight alive, as the cop could have ended the bout 1,000 times but preferred to continue inflicting pain upon the young fighter in an effort to teach him what true justice was. If you're interested in hearing the whole story, keep your eyes peeled, as I will be covering it in the manga motivation playlist. In the end, the corrupted vigilante is defeated. Having to deal with the absolute failure of his ideals, he tenses his forearms in frustration, unaware of where it all went wrong. Psychopathic fighters like this are not uncommon in martial arts series, and I look forward to diving deeper into the abyss and revealing more of these horrific characters to you. But that will be for another episode of Muscle Manga.